Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 32, reading to verse 52, the end of the chapter. Hear the word of the Lord. And they were going on the road, going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. And Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, We are able. And Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And they came to Jericho, and as they were leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, Call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, he is calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, Go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. May the Lord bless the reading of his holy word. Did you ever not know who someone is and be embarrassed when you find out? You just think he's just a normal guy. You tell him he's wrong about something. It turns out he's an expert on that. Maybe like an undercover boss. You think he's an incompetent employee, and it turns out he's the CEO. I once found myself telling some guy online that a kick in a football game wasn't really a squib kick. But then something about the way the guy responded made me wonder whether he really knew the subject. And so I Googled his name, and it turned out he had been a kicker in the NFL and sent to the Pro Bowl. In other words, he was recognized as one of the best kickers in the NFL and was currently the kicking coach at the University of Florida. I didn't know who he was. When I was in seminary in California, I had a job with security for the seminary, and part of my job was to keep an eye out for any trespassers, anybody who doesn't belong. And one day I saw a man I didn't recognize using the copying machine that belonged to the theology professors. So I approached him and asked, I didn't know who he was. I asked him, Who are you? Just some guy off the street trying to take advantage of the seminary's copying machine? I approached him, I asked him that, and he said, I'm Donald McGavern. I knew that name. I didn't know his face, but I certainly knew that name. Donald McGavern was the former missionary to India who was known as the father of missiology, the study of missions, and he had founded the seminary's school of missions. It's important to know who someone is. We've just come off of Christmas, which is our culture's favorite holiday, and since it's supposed to be about Jesus, it's an opportunity to tell people who Jesus is. Of course, parts of our culture really likes it because it's an opportunity for them to sell stuff. That's why they like to find replacements for Jesus, like Santa Claus. Or if they do have to talk about Jesus, that's probably why they like Christmas so much. If they have to talk about Jesus, they'll talk about the baby Jesus, who was little, with a sweet head, no crying he makes. No one trembles at the word of a baby who doesn't cry. Now, some Christians' response to that is to go back to church tradition and to recover the liturgical calendar, that is the church year, which begins with Advent, the first Sunday of December, focusing on the birth of Jesus, and then from Christmas, we got Advent and Christmas, and to Epiphany. Christmas to Epiphany is the 12 days of Christmas, from that famous song. Epiphany happens to be tomorrow. Happy Epiphany Eve, I guess. So there's about 6 weeks then of the liturgical calendar are consumed with the birth of Jesus, focused on the baby Jesus. So that, in other words, think about it, from Advent, first Sunday of December, to Christmas, to Epiphany, tomorrow, it's about the same amount of time the liturgical calendar gives to Lent, which is supposed to be about preparing for the crucifixion and resurrection, and what they call Holy Week or Passion Week, Good Friday, and the resurrection. And that's a lot more time than the New Testament gives to those. I mean, that's vastly, as far as emphasis, out of proportion to what the New Testament does. For example, Mark has nothing on the birth of Jesus. It starts its history with his ministry, while everything from this point on, where we started today, chapter 10, verse 32, to the end of the Gospel of Mark, is about the cross and the resurrection. It's at least going in that direction. That's in the background, at least. Now, all overemphasis of the tradition and the culture, for that matter, on the birth and the baby leads to the impression, like away in a manger, that Jesus is a baby. Come to be sweet and to sweeten everything with his sweetness. But who is he? Really? That's what this passage tells us at the turning point of the Gospel of Mark. That's why we began here. You wonder, why in the world we start in the middle of chapter 10? This is really the chapters made by a monk, kind of help us find passages, but they are not an infallible interpretation of what is a good place to stop and start. And this is, chapter 10, verse 32, is a turning point in the Gospel of Mark when Jesus determines to go to Jerusalem, knowing what's waiting for him there. And he shows us in this passage, on the way to Jerusalem, 3 truths about who he is. He is first the sacrifice, second, he is the servant, and finally, he is the son of David. First, Jesus and his disciples are on the road to Jerusalem. Verse 32 says they were going up to Jerusalem. That doesn't mean they were coming from the south. That's often the way we talk. I'm going up to Danville or whatever. But it means here they were going up in elevation. They're coming from Jericho in the east, which is about 825 feet below sea level, and then going up to Jerusalem, which is about 2,500 feet above sea level. So it's a pretty good hike to go from Jericho up to Jerusalem. Verse 32 says Jesus was walking ahead of them. And this sounds unusual, the way it's put. He's like this is not normal. I'd imagine he usually walked alongside of his followers, talking to them. Normally up until now, he was likely strolling through the countryside. If he saw a flower, would pick it up and say something like, "Consider the lilies of the field. They neither toil nor spin, but your heavenly Father clothes them better than he does Solomon." Better than Solomon was clothed. Well, that was before, but now he's walking on ahead of them, like having a hard time keeping up with them. Probably at a brisk pace. And he knows exactly where he's going and why. He's not wandering toward Jerusalem. He's driven there. He's focused on getting there. And what happens to him there is not an accident, as though Jesus kind of stumbled into a dangerous situation that he wasn't aware of, like he was caught in a trap. No, he's marching ahead with a resolve to get there. What the Gospel of Luke describes about this very same turning point, also a turning point in the Gospel of Luke, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. So here his determination is so unwavering and his resolve so focused, it actually amazes and scares his followers. Notice that. They were amazed and they were afraid. Some were amazed, some were scared, some were both. That he's now focused like a laser beam on Jerusalem. That's his goal and nothing will stop him. It's amazing and scary. Then along the way, Jesus calls a meeting of kind of the inner core of his followers, called the apostles, 12 of them. In verse 32, it says he took them aside again, because this is the third major time in the Gospel of Mark that he does this. This time he gives the most details and he reveals who he is. He begins, behold, or see, pay attention to this. This is important. It's a way of announcing this is important. This is on the test, as a professor might say. We're going up to Jerusalem. He's determined to go there. He must go there. The Son of Man will be delivered. Son of Man is Jesus' favorite way of describing himself. Many people assume it's a humble title, like I'm just a son of a man. I'm just another guy, son of a man. But we saw in Daniel chapter 7, remember just 13 months ago, that the Son of Man is the one who brings God's kingdom on earth, who overcomes that last beastly empire. The empires, the kingdoms of men are beastly. They're like lions or bears. And in contrast to that, the one who brings in God's kingdom is like a man. He's human. He's elevated. He's not just a beast. So he brings in that kingdom. That's what Jesus is alluding to when he calls himself the Son of Man. And in Daniel 7, he is worshipped like God. And only God is worshipped. So he is God. So ironically, when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, he's implying, I'm God. Even the chief priests understood this, as we'll see. They asked Jesus, who are you? Who is he? Jesus says, you will see the Son of Man, me, coming in the clouds. And they accuse him of blasphemy for that. Who is he? He is the one who brings God's kingdom to overcome the beastly world. If that's the case, then you'd expect him never to be hurt or defeated. The undefeated champion of the world, right? To always be triumphant. But then he says this, starting in verse 33, I will be delivered over. Delivered by who? The Son of Man will be delivered. It's a passive sentence, which means that the subject, the one doing the delivering here, is not named. Who's delivering? It's assumed. It's not really Judas. Judas betrayed Jesus, but Judas only did what he was chosen to do, what came naturally to him. It's what they call a divine passive, a reference to God which leaves God unnamed. And it's assumed he's the one here doing the action. Here he's the one delivering. And so God will deliver over the Son of Man, Jesus is saying me, to the chief priest and the scribes. God is delivering him over to them. He's handing over Jesus to them so that they will do to him what God wants. In Isaiah 53, it was the will of the Lord to crush him. And what they want. In Acts chapter 4, verse 28, the apostles prayed that God's hand and plan had predestined what took place when Jesus was arrested and beaten, humiliated, and killed. Now, that doesn't mean that those who did it, like the chief priests and the priests and the scribes and the others, as though they were overcome and forced to do something by God. God overcame what they wanted to be good to Jesus, but God forced them to do something they didn't really want to do. Like a puppet is overcome by a puppet master. No, that's not at all. Notice here, God hands Jesus over to them so that they will do what they want to do, what comes naturally to them. Now, sure, God's hand and plan had predestined what took place, but he didn't have to force them to do what they didn't want to do. He could just give them over to Jesus and let them do what they wanted, which is what God wanted. Then Jesus predicts exactly what will happen. So he doesn't just have like a vague feeling that things might get unpleasant in Jerusalem. I have a bad feeling about this. Like from Star Wars, I have a bad feeling. No, nothing like that. He specifically foretells what is going to happen. They, the chief priests and the scribes, will condemn him to death. Then they will deliver, same word as before, in the first half of the verse, Jesus over to the Gentiles, meaning the Romans. They're the Gentiles here. And everyone knows how the Romans deal with condemned rebels. You know, right? In verse 34, they will mock him, like putting a purple robe on him while punching him, like putting a crown of thorns pressed down into his scalp while slapping him in fake salutes. They will spit upon him, degrading him. They will flog him as they do in preparation for the crucifixion. They will kill him. Notice how specific this prediction is. This isn't just a feeling, like things could get bad there. How can the Son of Man come for this? After 3 days, he will rise. Notice that. He will rise. Rise. Now finally, he's the active one. He's the one doing the action. He will rise. He's not just risen by some force outside of himself. He is raising himself. He's delivered over by the Father. He's beaten and killed by others. And then he will raise himself from the dead. He's the one acting and rising. Who is he? That's the most important question in your life. More important than how you can get more money or more of whatever it is you want, how you can get whatever you didn't get for Christmas. The most important question is, who is this man calling himself the Son of Man, determined to go to Jerusalem, even though he knows that he will be tortured and killed there, and who says that he will raise himself from the dead? Who is he? He is second, the servant. By explaining he's the servant, Jesus explains who he is the one who is handed over and raises himself. So as Jesus is marching toward Jerusalem, James and John, two brothers, come up to him with a request. They have a petition. Teacher, probably translating the word rabbi, which means master. We want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. In other words, give us our wish, like Jesus was a genie from a bottle. And James and John apparently took the advice, you have not because you ask not, to heart. They learned that lesson. They didn't learn what Jesus told them, but you have not because you ask not. They learned that pretty good. So they're not going to be shy about what they want. Give us whatever we ask. I have a feeling Jesus smiled at that, or maybe even laughed at that. Okay. And he says in verse 36, well, what do you want me to do for you? Otherwise, he might do it, depending on what it is. All depends on what you're asking. You can have your heart's desires if your heart desires the right things. If your heart's desires to be rich and live in a big house with robot servants and drive luxury cars, have all the newest gadgets and go on extravagant vacations, well, your problem is not, how you can get what you want. Your problem is with what you want. What if they had asked instead of this, seats of power, what if they had asked, we want you to make us meek servants who love mercy and do justice and walk humbly with our God. Now that would be something that he would give them. So he's not against giving people what they ask. It's that sometimes they ask for the wrong things. Here, James and John ask in verse 37, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. So, in other words, they want to be the closest uppity-ups to Jesus when he finally seizes the throne, proclaims himself the rightful king of Israel, the son of David, kicks out the Romans, and he rules. After all, they're marching to Jerusalem. Jesus is so intent on getting there. The people around him are amazed and even intimidated by the fierceness of Jesus' intention to get to Jerusalem. They must be going to finally take over. Finally, they've been waiting for this moment. And it'll be glorious. It's going to be great when we finally get to Jerusalem at the end of this hike. You'll go to a grand, extravagant palace, into this ornate throne room with a platform 6 steps high with a sculpture of a lion on the side of each step, just like Solomon had. And on the top of that platform is an ornate, glorious throne with Jesus there ruling. And on either side of him, on his right hand and his left hand, will be James and John. That's their vision. That's what they want. James and John probably couldn't agree about who would be the right-hand man. They probably argued about that. The number one guy. So in their humility, they agreed to let Jesus decide that for them. They both said, we'll let Jesus decide who gets to be the right-hand man. But one of us definitely. That's the petition. And Jesus tells them in verse 38, you do not know what you're asking. They thought they did. They thought they knew that Jesus is the Messiah. The Messiah is the king. It's like David, that he's going to rule. And they'll be right there ruling with him. What's not to know? They know how these things work. They've seen them before. They were asking for the seats of power and privilege in the kingdom. Right now in America, with a new president elected but not yet taking office, there's thousands of people sending in their resumes, asking for positions of power and privilege in the new government. They want an office. They want a title. They want something carried with them even after the president's gone. So they'll say, I served. They always put it that way. I served in the administration. And that gives them open doors and contacts for a lucrative career in the future. That's what they're all after. Now here, James and John preemptively are asking Jesus to remember them for their promotion. Right? We're going to Jerusalem. You're going to take over. Remember us when you get to the top. You set up your government. And by your glory, that's what they mean. They don't mean in heaven. Glory in heaven. No, they mean when Jesus inaugurates, when he starts his glorious kingdom, his new government, when they finally get to Jerusalem at the end of his hype. But Jesus says, you totally misunderstood what I'm going up there to do. So he asked them in the second half of verse 38, are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Now the reference to the cup should be a clue. Besides the fact he just had told them when the Son of Man will be beaten and humiliated and killed. But the cup should be another clue of what he's going to be delivered over to. In the Old Testament, the cup of the Lord holds judgment. Psalm 75 verse 8 says, for in the hand of the Lord there is a cup of foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to its dregs. The dregs are dead yeast cells, grape seeds, and skins, and other solids that settle at the bottom of a cup or bottle of unfiltered wine. Isaiah 51 verse 17 says, wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem. You have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath. Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 15 says, thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath. So the cup represents the wrath of God for sin. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to drink of it. And this explains what the mocking, the flogging, the killing means that he had just mentioned. It means he's drinking that cup. He's drinking the wrath of God for the wicked. He's drinking it for us. Even though he is the only one who does not have to drink it. So the cup refers to God's punishment of sins, which he will bear in place of the guilty. Who is he? The cup tells us. He's the sacrifice. Now we ask James and John if they can drink that cup. They say they can. In verse 39, we are able. Are you sure? The cup should be a clue that it's not all glory, promotion, power, and perks like you asked for. It's the cup of the wrath of God to be drunk down to its dregs until there's no more wrath left. It's to be the propitiatory sacrifice, the sacrifice that appeases God's anger at sin so he no longer holds it against us. Now first, only Jesus can really do that because he has no sin of his own to have to pay for. We have our own sin, so we can't take someone else's sin. We have to pay for ourselves first, but Jesus has none. So when he takes the wrath of God for sin, he takes it in the place of others. So no, James and John, you cannot drink that cup. But in a lesser, a secondary sense, Jesus does share little taste of his cup with his people. So we know what he tasted. And so we get to know him. As Paul said in Philippians chapter 3 verse 10, when we share his sufferings, we become like him. In the Lord's Supper, we take the cup. We remember what he did for us. And in the end, everyone either remembers the cup that Jesus drank from, or they have to drink it themselves and drink it down to its dregs. Jesus also asked them, are you able to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Yes, we're able. So confident in themselves. Now the word baptism literally means immersion or dipped. The word baptized is the Greek word for immersion, to be dipped, to be submerged. Are you able to be immersed or dipped in what I am about to be dipped in? It suggests being overwhelmed by disaster or danger. Jesus didn't just get sprinkled with suffering. He just didn't put his toe in to suffering. He was immersed in it. Now, are you able to be overwhelmed by it? Now, they boast that they are able, and Jesus says in verse 39 that they will get a taste of that cup, and they will get dipped in suffering. And James was the first apostle to be martyred, killed by the order of King Herod Agrippa. John was exiled to Patmos. But in verse 40, to sit at my right hand or my left hand is not mine to grant. It's for the Father to grant. He's in charge of the seating chart. Yes, there is a glorious kingdom where those who have shared his sufferings are rewarded to sit beside the Son. But the Son lets the Father do the seating. It's for those for whom it has been prepared. The Father has prepared places for sitting in Jesus' glorious kingdom. And when the other apostles heard that James and John asked for this about their petition in verse 41, they were indignant, it says. In other words, they were angry. Not because they were disappointed that James and John had asked for a promotion, just after Jesus had described how he's going to be the sacrifice by being delivered over and beaten and killed. Jesus just described his sufferings and they asked for exaltation. And the other apostles, why were they so indignant? Because you're so carnal. I would never think of such a thing. No, almost certainly the opposite. They were indignant because they didn't think of it first. How come we didn't? Maybe Andrew and Peter were going, why, we should have asked for that first. We should have beat them to it. So Jesus calls another meeting in verse 42 and explains, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. I think he called emperor and often worshipped as gods themselves. People want positions for the power and the perks. Oh, they may call themselves public servants or comrades, but they're in it for the money or the power to get the money. But in verse 43, it shall not be so among you, among Jesus' people in the church. But, he says, it's a strong contrast there. You have the way the world works. People want power for the exaltation so they can be somebody. But, verse 43, the opposite of that for you in the church shall not be so. Not for followers of Jesus, but totally opposite. Whoever wishes to be great, it's their desire to be great. I want to be great. Not necessarily wrong with wanting to be great. It's just how to be great. Whoever wants to be great among you, among Jesus' followers, the church, must be your servant. And the Greek word there is diakonos, where we get the word deacon from. In verse 44, literally, whoever among you in the church wishes, that he desires to be first. It's his desire I want to be the number one guy among Jesus' people, shall be slave. It's a different word, more servile, of all. It's not just one of the biggest donors. Don't just be the slave of those who give the most, so they'll give you the most. Or the most important families. The slave of all of God's people. Do you want to be one of those whom the Father seats on the right or the left of Jesus? Then serve God's people, the church. Serve like Jesus served. He's the example of a slave of all, even the Son of Man, reminding us that what he's driven to Jerusalem for. Remember, he used Son of Man earlier. He's talking about what he's going to Jerusalem to do. Who is he? The Son of Man will be delivered over and killed. Even he came not to be served, not to get one of those prime seats in the glorious new empire, but to serve. He came to serve like a diakonos, like a slave, and to give his life a ransom for many. The ransom was the price paid to liberate a slave or a prisoner of war or a condemned criminal. Some people want to debate who the ransom is paid to. You pay the ransom to Satan, so Satan lets people go, or you pay it to God, so God lets people go. But that's really, I think, beside the point. The point isn't who it is paid to, but what or who it is. The ransom, which usually money, it's what the word ransom, just like today we use a ransom, we think of an amount of money. But here Jesus says that he serves by being the ransom. He is the ransom. He's giving his life for the many. And the many is the term for the elect people of God, God's people. So the purpose of the ransom here is to make clear that Jesus Christ, the Son of God and the Son of Man, is himself, he is the price to be paid to set us free. He is the ransom. He serves us by drinking the cup of God's wrath, so we are free from having to drink it. So, who is he? He's the servant. Who is he? Third, he's the son of David. As we see in that last story from verses 46 to 52 about Bartimaeus. As they're leaving Jericho on their long march up to Jerusalem with a huge crowd all around, a blind beggar is probably just plopped down beside the road, sitting in the dirt, probably some kind of shirt or cloth laid out in front of him where people could drop down coins for him. He's pathetic. He's desperate. It's kind of you just feel sorry for anybody would have to live like that. He hears that Jesus is going by. He's Bartimaeus. And the name Bartimaeus means in Hebrew, son of Timaeus, which anyone knows Hebrew can figure that out. Bar means son of, and then Timaeus. And Mark translated for us in verse 46, in case we don't know Hebrew, showing that Mark is written for Gentile people. In verse 47, he began to cry out. Notice he began to. He began to, which implies that he continued to do so. Like he started and he kept at it repeatedly, relentlessly. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Notice what he calls Jesus there. Who is he? Bartimaeus says he's the son of David, the one who fulfills the promises to David. Remember, God had made a covenant with David that one of David's sons would always rule. But a king from David hadn't ruled since 586 BC, almost 600 years now. Who was going to fulfill God's promises to David? Who is God's king? Well, that would be the son of David. Bartimaeus, blind, he sees that Jesus is the son of David. That's who he is. And Bartimaeus announces it over and over again, shouting, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. People all around him, they shushed him. Quiet down. Rebuked him. They want to see Jesus. They want to hear Jesus. If he can talk, they don't want to hear this blind man who's desperate, he doesn't mean anything, yelling like that. Keep quiet. But he kept at it, announcing loudly who Jesus is. Jesus, son of David. So in verse 49, Jesus stops and told the crowd to call him. And they called out. Notice in verse 49, they call out to the blind man. He's called there. Notice he called the blind man, even though we've already been given his name. Could just say he called out to Bartimaeus, but we're reminded that he's blind because he sees who Jesus is. Take heart. Be of good cheer. Be confident, Bartimaeus. Be encouraged. The word there is used 7 times in the New Testament, and every time except here, it's spoken by Jesus. Here it probably originates with Jesus. They relayed the word to him. Who is Jesus? He's the one who tells us to take heart. Like in Mark chapter 6 verse 50, when Jesus is walking on the water in the middle of the storm, the disciples are in a boat and they're terrified. They look, who is this? Looks like a ghost walking on the water. And he cries out, he calls out to them, take heart, it is I. Here it's originally from Jesus, relayed to the blind man. Jesus says, take heart. He's calling out to Jesus for mercy, telling everyone who Jesus is. He's the son of David. He's the Messiah. He's the one who brings in God's kingdom, who fulfills all of God's promises. Take heart, Bartimaeus. He is calling you. So in verse 50, he flings off his cloak, springs up from the ground, runs to Jesus. Now imagine that blind people rarely run, because you would think you would be afraid of running into something. But here he runs, because he's just so excited and he doesn't want anything to get in to slow this down. So he comes to Jesus and Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do? It's basically the same question Jesus had asked James and John, remember? What do you want me to do for you? We want you to give us the prime spots of the kingdom. Well, here, the blind man, he's called again in verse 51, says, Rabbi, master, teacher, it's a term of respect. That's who Jesus is. Well, what's he want from Jesus? In Greek, it's just 2 words, that and I may receive sight. 4 words in English, but in Greek it only comes down to 1. I have to receive it. I ask you to give me the ability to receive sight. I want to receive it, but I don't have the ability to. You have to give me that ability. I'm active, but my ability to receive it depends on you Master, Son of David. This is a perfect picture of salvation. Receiving spiritual sight. You cry out for mercy because that's all you can do. But make sure you know who you're calling out to. Make sure you know who He is. And when you do, then you receive. Yes, you are active. You receive. But you can only receive if the Son of David makes you able to. Jesus simply says in verse 52, go, your faith has healed you. It's His faith that made Him see, even when He was blind, that Jesus is the Son of David, the Messiah. His faith made Him believe that Jesus could heal him. His faith caused him to believe that Jesus could make him able to receive his sight. He ran, he asked for it, and he was able to receive. But first Jesus has to enable him to receive. Immediately, as soon as Jesus had said these words, he received his sight. He actively did what Jesus gave him to do. And he went, but not away. Remember, Jesus told him, go. So he went where he wanted to go, and that was with Jesus. He went with Jesus on his march to Jerusalem. Who is he? The Son of David. God's King who enables his people to receive the kingdom, to receive all the promises that Jesus fulfills. Who is he? Do you know who Jesus is? We confess him in the Nicene Creed, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God. That's great and true. But do you know who he is for you? Your sacrifice, who was delivered over by the Father to torturers and murderers for your sin. Do you know him as that? Your servant who drank the cup of God's wrath for your sin, who was immersed in God's judgment so as to be your ransom. The Son of David who fulfills all God's promises and enables you to receive them so that finally you see who he is. The only question now is, are you blind? Or do you see who he is?